Hello, I'm Sif, and I've been playing World of Warcraft on and off for the past 15 years. More off than on. My original run of the game was in Vanilla and TBC, and Wrath the Lich King, and subsequent expansions have really not held my interest for more than a few weeks at a time. I have revisited private servers that try to emulate either the vanilla experience or the Burning Crusade, and those have held my interest far longer than anything else since then. And with the re-release of Classic and the Burning Crusade, I have found myself sinking as much, or if not more time, into the game than my original run through it. So why do I enjoy Classic so much? Why did I lose interest in the end? Why can't any other expansion hold my interest? And why did so many other people lose interest as well? A lot of World of Warcraft has changed, but some of the core foundations of what makes it a good game have continued. There's really good combat, really good animations, really good music, consistent art style. It also has a very addicting type of reward loop that has not only improved, but added more things, more bells and whistles since then. And I really think that the key to classic World of Warcraft is this. And I know it doesn't look appealing, and it doesn't really capture interest while you watch it, but there is something enjoyable about playing through it. Now, plenty of combat encounters are fairly simple. They're pretty dull, they're pretty monotone, but occasionally, whether through random chance, an extra mob intervening, or even an enemy player showing up, you have to start making decisions. Now, for example, let's just remove everything from the user interface except for the two health bars of yourself and your enemy, and I'll give you a problem. I'm about to die. What do I do about it? You could probably give me a dozen different answers if you're a veteran. Things ranging from look in your inventory to see if you have consumables, use some cooldowns to either kill the enemy faster or to save yourself, or die somewhere safe. Now I could even bring back the user interface and show you that this is my mage that I'm playing, and you can give me even more answers. In fact, I could rewind to the beginning of this encounter, and you probably even have more solutions for why I even got to the situation where I was about to die. And I think this is where the game really shines. Now, if I had to graph WoW combat with like time over excitement or time over intensity, most of it, especially to veteran players, would look like a flatline. You know the outcome and you can predict it, but sometimes it does get intense, and the more new you are at the game, the more of these situations you get into. There's a lot to learn in this game, a lot of enemies, different combat patterns, and quests all shake up the variety of content. I think a lot of players hate leveling because they've mastered the type of gameplay to complete it, for one, and intentionally not to take risks, because dying is a big waste of time. So naturally they kind of nerf the challenge on their own so that everything ends up looking kind of flatline. There is a way to increase your own challenge at the cost of more risk, but in certain situations, especially on a PvP server, you can't really take those chances. But the combat system doesn't really stop at solo play. 5-man dungeons use the same tempo and resources that single player does. It's just a group of players fusing into one unit to take on more challenging mobs or areas, most of which are organized like the cave areas of the open world. The biggest difference is that there's just multiple different ways to approach the problem of combat, and there's a variety based on the classes and players brought in. I think that's why 10-man raids are so memorable, particularly like Karazhan, because there's enough variety in players and classes and specializations, and so many are wanted in larger group content. There simply wasn't enough space in a 10-man to cram them all in. So a lot of times you didn't get the perfect solution and composition for every fight, so compromises, ideas, and different approaches had to be found, and the impact of one class could be distinctly felt most of the time. And I think that's why I enjoy Old WoW so much, is because there's just enough variety that comes in from a random assortment of players and characters to keep things interesting for several hundred hours. Now, as to why subsequent expansions slowly threw my interest away is because the overall experience in dungeons and solo content became solved very quickly. Solo content became simpler, more guided, chances of being overwhelmed were minimal, and dungeon content really only had one solution, which was just pull everything and AoE it down. If things were going wrong in that dungeon, you would just pull less. It moved that problem-solving type gameplay deeper and deeper into endgame, rather than sitting with it comfortably throughout the entire experience. As to why that happened, I think there's two reasons why. One is because, like I said before, players solved it. They essentially nerfed the content for themselves, so they kind of clamored to the developers to offer them more of a challenge. They solved dungeons and raids, so the only thing they could do is just sit and wait for the next content to come and challenge them again. And the second is that difficulty increases in content, as well as more small group content in the form of arenas coming out, put a magnifying glass on all the weaknesses and strengths of classes, tended to socially prune players from even being able to play. I have a lot to say on difficulty, and I think that warrants another video, but I believe that the process of homogenization of classes is a two-way street. Let's just say we're playing the original vanilla WoW and doing level 60 or endgame dungeons. It's not super punishing for making mistakes. It can be done with less than a group of 5. You don't need a perfect composition or play to do most, if not all, the dungeons here. Now look at the game in the following expansion, where heroic dungeons are added to the Burning Crusade. The requirements to complete the experience is way more strict. Tanks get hit harder, threat is a bigger issue. If anybody rips off the tank, they'll usually die in one hit. The increase in difficulty lowers the amount of solutions possible to complete the dungeon. It becomes far more apparent which strategies are weaker than others. Now normally if this was a single player game, I could just pick and choose the optimal strategy. Prune characters I don't think are good for certain challenges, but if it's a 5-player dungeon in an MMO, that means I have to omit a class and a player behind it. I may have put hundreds or thousands of hours into that character. For example, one of the ways to simplify heroics was to bring classes that had crowd control of any type. And the rogue class had the ability to sap, albeit it would break them out of stealth immediately. The only way to circumvent this was to take a talent that removed the stealth breaking, in turn lowering their DPS. This issue with rogues wasn't fixed until 5 months later after the expansions released. Later in the patch lifecycle of TBC, the gameplay that lingered throughout the rest of WoW's lifecycle merged. Namely, paladin tanks got buffed to a point where they can comfortably tank dungeons and hold threat on seemingly an infinite number of mobs. And bringing classes that had AoE damage to burn it all down was the go-to strategy. And again, rogues were omitted because they didn't have any AoE until the following expansion. So the problems happened initially because of the rise of difficulty, and then later the problems arose because of the exponential gear increases and the efficiency of AoE tanking. Really an emergent type of gameplay that everybody clamoring to have similar potency when it came to AoE. How do you fix that? How do you undo something that made the trash in the game rather thoughtless? Naturally, players, just like in their leveling experience, sought to make their game experience as safe and as quick as possible. Blizzard decided to lean into this type of gameplay, and I don't blame them. It's way easier to balance gameplay when every class is pretty similar, especially in more difficult content when you really only need 3 factors to consider. Now, how do you fix it? Does Blizzard or even the majority of the player base even want to go back to that past version? And why even serve players that are no longer around? In hindsight, the solution seems simple: reducing gear scaling over the course of an expansion, and to do more aggressive patching to address problems of exclusion almost immediately. But it's like Pandora's box. Once it started, it was hard to put everything back to the way it was. And that type of problem-solving gameplay really only exists in Mythic Plus and harder raid difficulties, meaning that the majority of WoW is rather dull. Overall, I think I'm done with WoW, because I've figured most of it out. And I don't feel like playing a game where the only challenge that crops up is for content that is scheduled, where I can find that challenge elsewhere at any time. And if I want to AoE dungeons down, there's games that do it better. Hello everybody, thanks for watching. If you like the content, please consider subscribing and pressing the like below. If you want more content, please follow my socials at Twitter and Twitch, where I will be streaming.